Hello, everyone, friends. Welcome to this episode of Wheel Tapping. Today, we are going to cover 1861, the Russian Railroad. Now, I think we're also going to have to touch on Canada a little bit. And Tony joined me and brought up a great idea. So I'm your host, Chris Whitpan, with co-host Tony Fryer, the man, coming in from Colorado today. Tony is the expert on the show. I'm the newbie. That's what I'm saying anyway, for those of you listening at home. But, I think there's somebody else who could kind of help us out a little bit. So I brought in special guest Joshua Starr, who is currently has 61 up on Kickstarter for the new version.
Yes, sir.
So, welcome, Joshua, to the show. How are you doing?
Thank you. I was going to say I'm doing all right, but I think I'm doing quite well.
As of this recording, it has crested $50,000, and you are screaming along quite well. The Ford train has popped. You're working on your permanence, and things are great.
Yes, sir.
You're about to hit that diesel, so things are good.
I'm waiting for the 5 plus 5E, baby. We're gonna do
There
it.
you go.
That's optional.
There you go.
Sorry, that's so
No options here. Has to be.
So we actually had planned to do either 61 or 22 as our next episode, and it just worked out that it seemed very fortuitous. And Tony said, "Why don't we try and get Josh on?" And I'm like, that would be perfect, because who knows 61 better at this moment in time? Probably.
Regretfully, that is the truth. I've been living and breathing 61 for I think a good 8 months now, 8 to 10 months of just looking at 61 all day, every day. So and also digging in the rules, spending probably like 100 hours on it. So yes, I think I will. Normally, I'm a hopefully humble guy, but I think in this case, I'll say that I think I know what I'm talking about in this case.
Absolutely. So between you and Tony, you guys will cover it. My play count on this one is probably sitting at around half a dozen. Played it at a few counts. Recently played it this week with some of the variants, with the Campact variant for the RSR, which was fun and something different. So I have a few plays. Tony, how many plays do you have in on this guy?
Only 9.
Okay.
Yeah, so not tons, but love it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely going to be interesting. Now, so this is actually designed by Ian Wilson, and it's published by JKLN Games, which Z-Man brought over. So there's actually a pretty large printing of this that happened once upon a time in 18XX standards. It was also put out by All Aboard, but most importantly, at the time of this recording, it is on Kickstarter by Grand Trunk, which is your premier game. I'm not wrong in that, am I, Josh?
No, you are not. Yeah, first game, experiencing the ride.
Yeah. So, and it's a double because you literally get both in the box, where before we would have to buy them separately, or buy one as Canada as an add-on to this. So that's going to be a nice little difference. So let's run down the game. Let's talk a little bit about what the game is. When we are just going to use 30 as a baseline, 2930, for comparison, because I think that's pretty well known in the industry. And this is what we like to call a merger style game. So this is kind of falling in that merger acquisitions kind of category. And it also has the large formation of the Russian, which makes it definitely different. Do you want to explain the auction real quick, Josh?
Sure. Auction is about as simple as it can get. You have 5 private companies, and you start with private 1. You go to private 5. When you auction off private 1, there's a minimum bid, and you have to go up in increments of 5. Highest, once everybody passes, highest winner gets it. Then you start the next private company with the person to the left of them. And yeah, it's a very, very straightforward auction.
Right. And these privates are some of the simplest, I think, around. They are really just city enhancers at this point, right? There's really nothing special, no huge blockers. They all block.
They're pretty much revenue bonuses and income.
Yeah.
And you get to buy them in phase 3.
Right. So, but there's also something fun about them, and that is if you hold on to them, even if your companies might not have enough money to buy them in, the Russian will be very nice and buy them in for you at a point in the game. So, if you were unable to use something, at least you'll get a little money out of it in the end. So floating majors. So majors, you can only float later in the game after the Russian is formed. Before that, you have to grow up miners or you have to merge miners. And the miners do have to be connected. This is the first game we're talking about that deals with miners and how they work, which is what makes this game pretty unique. And I believe, Josh, you said it's what attracted you to actually doing it.
Yeah. So, well, I could probably dive into that a little bit more later, but
Sure.
I think, yeah, I mean, it's a game that doesn't hit you with every single rule the moment you start playing.
Right.
You're gonna play the minor phase and you go into the different phases of the game. So I thought that was a really desirable aspect for a first time play.
Awesome. Basic capitalization is going to be incremental cap, with shares being like basic 10 share companies. The miners are all essentially 2 share, 50-50 split companies. And then track laying. Track laying is kind of something we saw in 30 where you can lay one, upgrade one, and then pay $20 to get an additional tile. So, but the tile has to be a basic one. So it helps fill out the board because that board's big. There's a lot of tile to fill out. You can always drop a yellow somewhere, right? Trains, there's nothing too crazy about the trains. We'll talk a little bit about the rush when we get to that because controlling the 4s, because when you buy the first 4, that's going to trigger the Russian, which now forms, making things interesting. And then, of course, the map. So let's head on over to the yellow phase and let's start talking about this bad boy. In the yellow phase is the stock market. Tony, do you want to go into anything specific about the stock market here and how it behaves? Maybe something that's different from some other stock markets we've seen?
Yeah, sure. I think that compared to like 1830, it's an uneventful stock market. The game isn't in the stock market. As you mentioned, only the president's sales of shares will lower the price of the value of the shares. But what I think is the coolest thing about the stock market is that you see on the screen there, that yellow column, because that is a limit on the miners. The miners can only be valued as a maximum of 165. And they hit that wall and they have to climb up that. And when they're in that yellow column, that's when they're eligible to either convert to a or to a major company or to join with another or more companies in a merger.
So it's definitely interesting. It's also one of the first markets I ever encountered where things rise when they're fully held, and that's pretty common in 18xx, but they actually bounce in this one. So if you're fully held, you don't just, oh, sorry, you're at the top, so what? You actually get to bounce down and forward. So that's I thought that was fun. And interesting, but the zones definitely make a huge difference. The last game I played, I was struggling to get some miners because I opened them pretty low, and I was struggling to get them into the yellow so that they could be, grow up. So I ended up having to merge instead of grow up just because of that. Anything you guys feel like the stock market does well? Anything that it might do? You kind of mentioned the yellow zone there a little bit, but we can also par pretty high in this game too.
Yeah, absolutely. As you can see there, public companies, you can go as high as 200.
Right, which is, normally we cap out at about 100, but that's nice for late game funding and money. Provided there's any companies left, you can certainly get some high pars going late in the game and get some good cash infusion, which I found that to be pretty unique and different.
Yeah, one thing I'll comment on the stock market is Ian did a really cool job in making the math feel very symmetrical, I guess is the word that I would say. Like, say, for example, you have a company that is a 60 and a 60 company, and then you just kind of have these numbers that just sometimes when you do a merger and then it goes up to like 230, but then the next stock value is like 200 or something like that. And you don't actually, then you lose values. Oh, it feels bad, man.
Right.
But then there's all these all these numbers just add up together perfectly. So it's like you have your I'm going to show that I can't do quick mental math here.
That's not a good quality for an 18xx player, just saying.
Yeah. You have your 70 and your 65. It's like, oh, 135. Oh, perfect. It added up to that exactly. I have my 70 and my 80. Oh, 150. Perfect. And so there's kind of like, there's this a really awesome consistency in terms of the values and the way that the market is just even structured, and the values that Ian Wilson was able to put together. So not only just the zones are interesting, but I think that he was able to get the stock market right, I think.
Interesting. And it's this one's pretty deep. You know, when we were talking about Chesapeake, we talked about a very shallow market, whereas this guy is this one is pretty deep. So you have to really work to get over and to get up on it, as opposed to just, keep trucking along, you'll get there eventually. But I thought it was interesting because this is also one of the games when I started playing, this was one of my earlier introductions, that stock prices don't fall when a shareholder sells a share, only when the president does. So, if you're looking for a game and you get tired of people selling your stuff and dumping your stock value and things like that, this kind of is the more Care Bear version of that stock market for you. So you don't get beat up a lot. Those nobody likes those rounds. Let's be honest, they're rough.
Well, those rounds are fun when you're the one who are dishing out the pain.
Yes,
you just have to be on the giving end, not the receiving end.
I think you can figure out where I usually fall in that equation. So fair enough. But it also kind of takes out, and maybe this is more of a shenanigans discussion, but it kind of also takes out a lot of the value manipulation for turn order, because now that's one weapon out of that arsenal. You have to really rely on your value and everything going forward.
So it's an interesting thing that you mentioned there. Yes, selling shares, you're not really able to tinker with the order of those. So the actual order manipulation starts to come in. So there is order manipulation, but then it's just in a different place. You're looking at the auctions, and you're looking at the way that you're shuffling trains between your companies, because you can be watching there's a really big component about timing how the companies are operating. So like, say, for example, I see that you did a bid at 140 for a minor company. That means you're paring at 70. I could bid 135 and still get enough to afford a 3 train, but then I run after you. So then maybe I wanted you to go before me, or maybe I wanted to go before you. So there's that component comes in a lot more with the auctions, and just when you want your companies to not have a train, or when you want them to run a train. But we'll get into that in a bit.
So the other thing I think we need to we briefly talked about it when we were doing the intro, and that is the miners and how they start. So like you just said, we have to do an auction for them, and they start where they start. Like, they have position at the beginning of the game. You only have 10 available of the total 15. So getting those miners to kind of gel and get stuff that makes sense and synergizes is really important right out of the gate, let alone now you also have to make sure, am I putting enough money into it so it can get some decent trains and things like that, right?
Well, what's kind of cool about the way Ian set up the miner auction is, at least for the very first stock round, or at least during the yellow phase, when there are 10 yellow miner companies and there are 10 2 trains. So in theory, okay, each miner company gets a 2 train. Things can happen that change that, and then the minimum bid for a miner company is 100 rubles, and the cost of a 2 train is 100 rubles. So it's actually set up to be I like that you start the miner company and you know what it's doing. It's going to buy a 2 train, it's going to build some track. And there's not so much, it's actually very straightforward for your first couple of rounds of operation. You don't, it's going to buy a 2 train, it's going to build some track. Where can I run a 2?
Right.
A lot of the stuff comes out when you're starting to manipulate stuff that happens between the companies. But yeah, I'd say the miner auction, you pretty much, you put something up for auction, everybody's bidding for it, and the money that's used from that bid is what's going to set the par value as well as capitalize the company. And I think that's kind of, it's a very, I think if fairly straightforward thing for a new player to grasp in terms of, because when you're doing other incremental cap games, say 1846, what to par your company at and how many trains you want and what you want to do, that can be a really, really mathy problem to try to figure out. I love 1846, but I've had a lot of new players kind of sitting in.
Yeah.
Should I par at 50 and buy 6 shares? And I say no. Or you do it. I don't know.
Got to try everything, right? But I think it's one of the more straightforward auctions. And I think you're always going to get something. Just don't ignore Moscow is, I think, the key goal to that. Make sure your miners can get there. Every game has a city, and we'll get to that a little bit here when we get to the trains and the forming of the Russian. So moving on to the green phase. So this is basically going to be talking about the trains and the Russian railroad and the forming of that, because one really triggers the other, and then the Russian it's essentially there to gobble up trains, and put out some tokens that could be annoying for people and things like that. So during the green phase, the one of the interesting thing is this one you can skip ticks, which I found very interesting when running trains. So you can just kind of skip them. Now you don't get paid for them, like in say Mexico or something, but you do at least get to skip them if you want, which is nice. But the train control it's really important. So we talked about those 10 miners and those companies coming out and them forming. Well, they're loaded with 2s and there's some 3s floating around. If you don't have a train after this phase is over and the 4 is bought, all those companies are going to get gobbled into the Russian. So Tony, do you want to walk me through a little bit about how we want to try and control the trains and what kind of fun can be had in that little playground there?
Well, naturally, I guess you'd want to be the person that buys the first 4 train and causes the commotion of the Russian formation, and obviously get that done when other players are hoping you can't. But I think the 3 train is a very important train in the early phase of the game, because and there's a fun shenanigan you can do to get a 3 train that we'll talk about later. But obviously, when the 4 train is bought, the 2 trains go away. If you don't have a train and you've already previously operated, you're going to get sucked up into the Russian State Railway. So that's what makes the 3 train very important. So, looking at what miners you own and which ones do you want to have 3 trains and how you're going to get them in there and moving, things around. And potentially, which miners are you happy to let fall into the Russian when that 4 train buys and recoup some investment, So it's a definite tool, the Russian. It's not something that should be feared.
Right. It's as long as you plan for it. But if there's kind of this problem, right? Because you're trying to save up to get a 3 train, so that company has a lot of cash in it. It probably only has a 2, and then all of a sudden the Russian forms, and you just lost all that work. You may have not even put out a couple double tiles because you were so concerned about trying to get some cash in to buy that 3, and it's not that ever happened to me. No, that never happened. Never happened. Josh, what do you think the fun part about the trains in this one?
A lot of times when you're playing 18xx, it takes you kind of a while to get your multiple companies up and running to experience train shuffling. But in 1861, 1867, you're train shuffling from OR1. Like, you can buy a train before you run it and shuffle it over. And so there's a lot of stuff that you're doing to control the pacing of the trains and how they come out. As Tony said, the 3 trains are very, very important, because ultimately what that means is those are the miners that are going to stick around. The miners that are going to stick around are the ones that have 3 trains, because the other miners that don't have 3 trains have already tried to form into a major company. By the way, just a distinction in this edition, I'm calling public companies major companies. So just so folks can follow along and know what I'm talking about. You can kind of infer, but just to be clear. Right. So the miners that are sticking around are the ones with the 3 trains. So those are really, really crucial to get. I think that when the 4 comes out, it's a really good exercise in learning how to learn a lesson that you can't save them all because some minor companies are going bye-bye.
Right.
A handful of minor companies are going bye-bye, and you have to be ready for that. And you have to know that some of your stuff is going to die, and you want to make sure it's the right stuff. And so that's a really tense moment in 61, 67. There's always so much tension when the 4 is coming out, and everybody's watching because the 4 is not a cheap train when by that point in the game it's 350 rubles, and so everybody's watching who's going to bring out the 4 because that's your clock. And if you don't want to be caught with your pants down, because that can, it's not that you're not necessarily going to lose the game, but that will certainly set you back if you lose some crucial miners that you really wanted with their capital and the trains and all that.
Yeah.
Right. One an important item of context for this conversation could be really kind of 2 points. One is, unlike many games, in 1861, you as the president or the director of a company cannot aid it in purchasing a train. You cannot go into your pocket and buy a train. So if the company cannot afford it, the company cannot afford it, and it will be vulnerable to the Russian. The only help available to these companies, and for a miner, you can only take 2, and that's loans.
Right.
But the loans, they're $50 loans. You pay the interest right away. So at most, you're getting $90 in loans, and often that's just not enough. So if you're looking to save one of your miners, you're trying to get enough money to buy, a 3 train or a 4 train, but you can be a little bit short and still take out a couple of loans and get there if you need to. And loans are something we should just talk about in general.
Yeah, and the interesting thing about it is you can't just say, "Oh, I'm going to take a loan." You have to need a loan. So for either track or for a train, right?
For track. Right.
Yeah, which that's cool because you can still lay, and that means you can lay that extra track if you need to. So you can really abuse miners, right? You can make them the backbone, and
just coming out. It's like no. This is what I was saying earlier, but I imagine if somebody comes to this conversation and you can just abuse miners.
Yeah, no, not those kind of miners.
No. Minor railroads.
minor railroad companies that are okay. I'll let that joke lie. But yes, there's another thing that you can take loans for is paying loan interest as well. And then also if you have outstanding loans, if you have cash to pay it, you must. So if you can pay back a loan, you must. So a lot of times people are thinking oh, I just saved up for my train. I'm so excited. I'm going to be able to buy the first 3 trains. Oh, sorry, no, you can't do that. You have to pay back your loans.
Right. And
the loans will they'll hurt your value when you convert, merge, or go into the Russian.
Yeah, but it's only one. So you go back when you merge in, and then you go down for each loan. So, I mean, it can be a cheap way to get $40-50 into a company that needs the money, right? You're not personally on the hook for a ton, but you could be.
Well, the loans are very efficient, very money efficient. It's a 10% interest rate on the loans per OR. But if you think about how much that money is going to work for you, I mean, 61 is a fairly cash-rich game. I mean, you buy 2 trains for $100. If you have the N and it runs for 80, it almost paid for itself with one run.
Yeah, and
so
that tends to be what happens, right?
Yeah, well, so you want as much money as possible to buy as many trains as possible and start as many companies as possible because it's lucrative and you're going to get a good ROI. So you want to find all the nooks and crannies to get as much money into your control as possible.
Right. Now, the other thing is we talked a little bit earlier about miners. So there are 2 things that you can do with miners. You can either grow them up. If they hit that zone on the map that we talked about, that key zone, they can just grow up spontaneously. Otherwise, you can merge 2 together and all the trains, all the loans go with it though. So it's not like they go away. You still have to deal with them. Yeah. So it's a great way to kind of absorb a company that might have great track that you want to keep. So maybe you put it together. And the merger is pretty friendly. Am I wrong in that? Like it's good, it's high value. You basically merge, you get the combo values, the new value of the company. So it works pretty well as far as like you're not losing out in share value like you do with a lot of other mergers and a lot of other games where you get full price of this one, half of your low one, or whatever, kind of crazy way they come up with calculating it. And USA or 17 gets a little like, wait, how much? What's my par price? And then, like you were saying about the high end, right? It's like, oh, I come in at 230. Well, the nearest value is 210. Great, I just lost $40 on my two shares right out of the gate.
And that's what I was saying. Yeah, exactly. That's what I was saying earlier. Is that the mergers actually don't feel bad, which is nice. A lot of times mergers feel bad, you lose something, but the stock market is it's very efficient because a lot of the prices that you are going to be merging at add up to these kind of clean round numbers.
Yeah. So I think that that's important. So the other thing, the Russian let's just talk about the core game and the core means, right? The Russian is it's going to start, and generally speaking, it absorbs all these miners with no trains. So it's going to take out loan after loan after loan after loan, and then start slowly buying trains up, and then really, it doesn't build any track. It doesn't do anything like that. We're just laying tokens. Am I right in saying that that's pretty much all the Russians' purpose is to move trains along and token out some spots?
Yeah, it's your game clock, right? So
yeah,
it's kind of based on how you ran the opening of the game when you're in the 2s and 3 trains. That can dictate how good the Russian is going to run. So just for context for folks, the Russian State Railway, when it operates, it's going to be operating for its maximum revenue and withholding all of it and using that money to either pay off its loans or to purchase trains. So when the Russian State Railway first operates, it's probably not going to have any trains. Hopefully, it won't have any trains. Somebody might screw up somehow and they try to merge. Maybe they have 2 3s in a minor company or something like that. And when the 4's bought, the train limit drops down to 1. So maybe they have to eject a 3 train, which is painful. But then it'd be in the bank pool. So that's different. But for the Russian, really the way it works is it starts slowly because it's taking all these loans, and then it just accelerates like crazy. So it's when it's running through the 4 trains, it's just paying off its loans and all that stuff. But when it gets to the 5 and the 6, and if it has a Moscow token, the game will end very quickly.
Right. But it's unlike, some other majors that might form. The 2 that come to mind for me are Mexico with the NDM, and then also we have the 18MY with forming the New York Central. Those are actually operated by a player, and they're share companies that you can own. The Russian is not that. The Russian is just there to be the behemoth in the tank and not make anybody any money.
Correct. Yeah. So it's an AI player. I mean, that somebody will have to operate, but yes, it's an AI player that is pushing the game along.
Yeah, and let's put a pin in that because I think that there's a discussion coming that kind of revolves around how the Russian operates and whatnot, right? Does anybody have anything else to talk about with the trains and the Russian itself? Does anybody have anything to add to that? All good? All good. All right. So that brings us to the brown phase. Now, this is Shenanigans. Hopefully I spelled it right this time. Sorry. So Shenanigans, this is where we like to encompass all the things that kind of, that experienced player knows. Like, I'm sure Josh has many of them to kind of choose from, even though this game really kind of stages itself as not a shenanigan rich game because like we talked about with the share drops only on the president's sale, things like that are kind of geared towards not having a lot, the Russian buying up your miners if they have no train. So there's different situations that might come up, but overall, what do you all feel? And I'll start with you, Tony. What do you feel is one of the more fun shenanigans you can kind of play with this one?
The Russian. He's a shenanigan, right?
He's a giant
Uh,
shenanigan.
a giant shenanigan, just allowing companies to go into that. I remember an early game of 61 in my playing experience where one of the players just opened a ton of minor companies and just really didn't care, let them fall away and get the money back and start a new major. He was killing it. He was making piles of money, 50% of everything, and
Right.
that was his plan, was just to let the Russian eagerly accept many of those companies and just make as much money as he can and start a solid company.
It's one of the more interesting ones because you can just keep getting quick revenue. You're getting a lot of track built for yourself potentially, and the major you're trying to start up, so you can really operate a lot on the back of a minor. And I think that's a ton of fun. What about you, Josh? I know you are chomping at the bit with a couple shenanigans for us today.
So yes, I mean, to me, a lot of 18xx is a lot of games is about finding the cheese, right? So what you're trying to do is you're trying to find what's the most efficient way for me to get money in my pocket, and how do I? So with 1830, that's looting in private companies. You can buy 2 times face value, and you're going to get this huge lump sum of cash that you can put back into buying shares.
Mm-hmm.
Well, where's the cheese in 61? And I think that goes into efficient nationalization. So because you know that you have all these different companies and you know that you can't save them all, what you're focusing on is, how do I take this company, use it to my advantage, consolidate its assets, and basically flip it back, basically turn it back out to the miner. So it's pretty much, think about it this way, is that the government's going to give you a really nice subsidy. You're going to take it, that subsidy, and say, thank you very much. And you're going to say, oh, look at this insolvent company. Oh no. Right?
Oh
Because
no.
they're giving you very efficient loans. When you par a company at 100, you're parring it with a stock value and you're getting its treasury. So almost in a way, when you create the company, you double the money and you have these loans. How do you consolidate that, absorb it, and use that for your advantage? So it's funny when people describe it as a run good companies game, so yes, the end game definitely has that feeling. But one of my favorite things to do in 18xx is run dumpster companies. I like to run bad companies and have the companies. I like to have a good company and a bad company, and I use my bad company to prop up my good one. And so I think 1861 and 1867 has that in spades. There's a lot of stuff that you can do to use and abuse the government subsidies.
Right. Nobody ever abuses government subsidies. I don't know what you're talking about, Joshua. I don't know. I think you're both absolutely right. And one of the things that I saw that kind of happened to me was engineering those trains and shuffling them is so key. Josh, I think you mentioned earlier that you're shuffling out of the gate, and hopefully you are creating holes. Well, unbeknownst to me, when somebody opened a company, they're able to create enough of a vacuum that they were able to buy 2-3 trains and then pick up the first 4. I mean, and it was a full turn before it looked like they had the ability to do it, because I probably wasn't factoring in the loans well enough to realize what was happening. And it decimated 3 of the companies of the 4 I was running at the time, just got sucked out of the door. And I was just like, I got paid for it and I was able to do things, but at the end, not a winning strategy. We'll go with that.
Yeah, more of a consolation prize.
Yeah, because I mean, at least you get a decent value, but you're not getting your maximum value. Had I been able to survive that merger round, literally the next OR, they were going to pair off and merge, and the players saw it coming.
That's always what it is. It's if I had one more turn, and that's why I really like it, because there's always this tension of, well, if I just need to make it one more turn, and then if players are willing, they will make sure that you don't get that one more turn.
Right.
I would say the magic number for when you're looking at cash and you're looking around the table You're generally, because so we were saying that two loans, a loan is 50 rubles, and then you're going to pay an immediate 5 interest on that loan. So
Right.
if you take two loans, you're actually getting 90 rubles. So the magic number that you're always looking for is the cost of the train minus 90. So a 4 train costs 350. You're looking at math is hard. 260. You are the 3 train costs 225. You're looking at 135. So that's always so you always have to put this imaginary 90 bucks on top of everybody's charter to see what their actual spending potential is.
Right.
For the minors, and then the majors, they can take 5.
Yeah.
Yeah. So a little more imaginary money on the majors, but it's not necessary. One of the cool ways to get a 3 train into your company, right, is you start a minor at 135, grab a couple of loans. You got 225 rubles for that 3 train. Then you have a company you actually care about, buy it for a ruble, and let that one go away when the 4 train gets formed, and you get $100 back.
Yeah.
So
not so terrible
for $35.
Now what gets interesting is so now let's say, for example, we're coming into stock round. Let's say we are in SR2 and we just started the let's say there's a little bit of train shuffling that happened. We let some nationalization happen in the first set of ORs. We're coming into stock round 2, and there's 1-2 train. Let's say there's 2 trains left on the top of the market. Now 3 miners might be starting, and then one person wants the 3 train. So you're trying to do this thing where you want the order to go such that somebody's going ahead of you buying the 2, because getting the first 3 is very, very nice. And so you're trying to do this juggling to make sure that you're doing the auctions right, where you're getting the right turn order. And I've actually seen companies start, and then they'll just buy 2 out from their tail company, their company running behind, just so they can be the last to purchase and get the 3 train. Stuff like that can happen.
Yeah, it's definitely a lot going on there. Tony?
Let me ask you guys about cross investment in this game, especially in that mid game when you want to buy shares, but you must be careful about capitalizing your opponent's companies too richly, and how that affects your plans, because they're going to be buying trains, right? So I sometimes feel in this game that there's a period of tension in that cross investment as well. Does that hold true with you guys?
Definitely for me. I found Tony, when you and I've played, I like to cross invest in other people's stuff. I like to, I don't feel it's a full attack, but if you're going to run for money and I have the money laying around, I'm going to buy your stock. That's going to be great for me. I have no problem with that. But this one, because you can usually play it safe and know where that money is, but with the loans and the potential that's there, especially in a 10 share company, I think it's very easy to get to a point where you're funding somebody else's game for them, where, I don't feel like that so much in other games. So I think you're absolutely right. What about you, Josh?
It's an interesting question, because it does go both ways. Because if I'm looking at a share that's priced at 120 versus a share that's at 150, the 120 is nice, because then what I'm ultimately doing is undercapitalizing their company. The trains run for a lot in this game. So if I can buy a share from you for 120, and that share ultimately would have paid you 300 into your company, I'm buying that bad boy at 120, because that's 300 coming into my pocket now. But it is a thing that you have to manage, because if you aren't in a position, you want to buy enough to bleed their company of the capital it needs for its big trains. You want to buy enough to do that, but you don't want to buy so much that they are going to be able to accelerate the game and rush your trains before you can really get on top of your earnings. Like, you want your trains to be able to run as much as they can for you to get the money that you so much deserve, right? So so my answer is it depends, and you want to bleed them enough that you hurt them and help yourself, but not so much that they're going to be able to use that as a weapon against you.
Yeah. And you also want to be careful that somebody's not throwing a company with no train and, 5 loan certificates into your lap because you weren't paying attention during the last priority round.
I mean, so it hurts. I mean, so that can hurt. But the thing is, so when you're looking at this game versus a game like 1830, the question to me always comes up is, what are your liabilities? In a game like 61, what's your actual liability? Well, you're going to be able to. So somebody dumps a company on you, and you have 5 shares of it, and they sold it, so it went down 1 stock value. All right, you basically exit. You can exit, and it's going to get nationalized. You can exit your position down to the president's share, and then those 2 shares are going to get sold for less. So pretty much, when you're exiting a position, you're just selling your shares for less. It's not dipping into the president's pockets. So the liability is not. You don't see as much company dumping there just because the liability is not a weapon that you can really use against other players. It's more that sucks. I wish I could have used that money to invest into something else this stock round.
Right. Interesting. All right. So any other shenanigans we need to talk about? I think that's pretty much what this game has to offer. It's not crazy. We're not dumping companies. We're not shorting anything, but there's definitely still a little fertile playground to play in here. Let's talk a little bit about the feels we get from this game. So in the gray phase, we like to talk about what are some of the feelings that you can walk away with in this game. What are some, maybe something to kind of have fun with and kind of play around with if you get to play it. Tony, what are some of the feels you get out of this bad boy?
I don't know. For me, the major feel that I have out of 1861 is love, because I was exposed to 61 pretty early in my yes. I was exposed to 61 pretty
I'll
early.
I'll flip you $20 after this podcast.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, no, it's 50. I don't think you saw my email. No, like I said, I this was one of my early games, and it really just like popped my eyes open with all the stuff it offers, right? With the mergers and the map. And I mean, it's just, it really solidified me on this path of turning 18xx games into, yes, lifestyle for board gaming.
Yeah.
And so it just, tremendous respect and appreciation for this game. It's fabulous. And I enjoy playing it all the time.
Awesome.
So that's my major feel right there.
I love it. It's a good feel to have. I'll go next because we'll let Josh kind of round this out, because I imagine he has some feels around it if he's willing to, stake his brand new company on its success right out of the gate. So I think his feels are pretty large scale and determinate. I really love it. This was the first one that I kind of got exposed to that kind of dealt a lot with mergers and growing up companies without having to deal with the 5 share growth that you get out of some other games, which is fun. But I like this concept better of like you have different places to start and you get to grow companies out of them. And that is where I had a lot of fun. Also, I think that there's enough money in the game, especially pretty early on, that you can have a lot of fun, you can lay a lot of track, and you can kind of build a really good map with it. The tokens, I feel, are pretty important in this one, and trying to make sure you have space to get in there. People will use miners to potentially block you, and then the Russian will take them over and take them off the board as well. So there's definitely stuff to watch for and better places to kind of start. Like I said, make sure you get into Moscow. But I really love it, and the timing of this one is so much fun, and trying to figure out when to try and trip that 4, when to try and have a merger happen. Are you going to try and shoot to grow one up, merge 2 others? There's a lot of telegraphing. People can see what you're doing, so trying to play close to the vest, but then kind of be able to sneak something in, that's a ton of fun. And that's really what I love about this one, is that it's big, but it moves along and it progresses pretty quickly too. Josh, what do you have to say?
Absolutely hate 61. It's a terrible game. No, no one should play it.
No one's buying what you're selling. I'm sorry. Well, they're not buying
Um,
that, but
yeah. So 61 right out the gate gives you such a big toolbox to mess around with. I mean, just the fact that you have so many companies, you have this nationalization mechanic, you have the loans. There's a lot of stuff that you get to play with just right out the gate, and a lot of games take a while to get that ramped up. And I think it shows people that side of 18xx right off the bat. I think that's a really I think that's the fastest way that you can experience that in 18xx. And part of why I chose 6167 is because no other game really has those minors, so much stuff happening with train shuffling, with the loans, merging them into major companies, the National Railway, and you can finish the game in 3 hours. Like, there's so many 18xx games that have that, but they take 8 hours. And like,
Right.
those games are fun, but how often am I getting those to the table? 6167 to me, it was a no-brainer for my first title because they're classic games. The way that you actually learn them is you can almost do like a rolling teach. And it's really easy to get started with them. And because the games give you like a rebate if your company gets nationalized or something like that, you're not out of the game if something gets nationalized. You're still in it. Maybe it hurts your position, but you still have a chance. And so just all these factors, it was just kind of like, yeah, this is to me the ultimate. This is like a very seminal game in terms of creating an elegant 18xx game with all these bells and whistles, and despite that, it plays in 3 hours. So, yeah.
And we didn't really talk too much about 67, and the Canada variant, because if you bought the original version, you would have to buy an upgrade kit that would add it back on all the things you needed to run 67. But essentially, it's the same game, the same rule set, but the Russian is now the cam pack, and it's handled a little differently. It's not something that has to run every turn. It's just a train gobbler, is probably the best way to describe it, right? It's just going to pull a train out of the stack and keep the game moving without all the micromanagement. Now, I don't want to jump ahead too much, but what do you guys feel about like the 67 versus 61? Do you feel they're just completely interchangeable, or do you like one over the other?
Nice. I I like them both. In Canada, it's easier just to have the Canadian take a train away rather than run them. And I actually like the ability to start a minor company in the location that you desire.
Right.
I don't know that I really favor one over the other.
Yeah.
I like them all. Almost.
Well, you do like them all. They are all your children, except for Coast to Coast. You'll never play that again, but that's fine.
I've never played it.
Well, you could play 5 games in that time. I think that's the rub. Josh, what do you feel like? Do you like one over the other? Is there one or just both situational?
They do very different things. So the export in 67. The export in 67 means that the moment the 4 trains bought, the game is over. It happens like that because pretty much it's exporting a train every operating round. so in 67, in 61, the Russian takes a minute to get up and running. You can get you can get a 4 train, you can get a 5 train, and you can have some money coming in that you're actually able to keep up with the game. 67, right. The game just is moving on whether you want it to or not. So I mean, the exports make the game faster to run just because you don't have to calculate the routes, but it's also much faster just in that the trains are just going and it's not stopping for you. Right. 67 has a really interesting token tension around Toronto. There's a track battle that'll happen where the Toronto token wants to get out. And a lot of people are very keen on making sure that doesn't happen. So there's choke points that you'll find you'll have choke points at Petersburg and I think Guelph, it can happen at Barrie, but like Guelph or Barrie. I'm probably saying all these names wrong. Sorry, Canadian folks. So there's some really interesting token tension that happens there. 61, the Moscow token is everything. You really want to fight to get that Moscow token, because that's being able to run multiple trains out of that. That's like it's like the center of the map choke point. Whereas in 67, everything's really concentrated to the south of the map, and everything is about having all these little fingers reaching up and trying to connect to Timmins. Dude, they're both really good games. I can't say that I prefer one over the other, but 67, the thing I do really like about, I feel like 61 has a stronger tension around the 4 trains. 61 has a really strong tension around the 4 trains. I feel like 67 has a really strong tension at every train, or every train from the 4s onward, because it's just a ticking time bomb, and you're just trying to survive.
Right.
In 67.
Makes sense. So that kind of wraps up our feels for the game. So that brings us to the end. So the end is when we talk about the priority deal. Now I don't personally own this game, Tony, so I don't have a personal priority deal marker for this one. But do you, sir, have anything cool that you like to use? I don't know why I'm asking. I know you do.
I have 2. One, of course, is the bottle of vodka.
Okay.
This is not water. No one has been. No one has decided in mid-game just to chug this thing, which is shocking.
Missed
and
opportunity.
The other is the stocking dolls, the stacking dolls. So
that's awesome.
So this seems to be everyone's favorite when we play. So.
All right. So I guess that kind of says that you're always playing Russia then, right?
Well,
so what we're going to do is we'll get Russian dolls. We'll get Russian dolls with a little Mountie on it, right?
I totally think that needs to happen. And then, have like Rodney be the last Mountie in the middle. I think that would be, that'd be awesome. So the other thing we're going to add in to the priority deal is, sure, that's all 61 talk. But let's talk future of 61, because it is the new version's coming. So if you haven't kickstarted this, or maybe you're going to wait until it hits the market, that's fine. But what differences is Josh got cooking in this, aside from some pretty gorgeous boxes and some art? So let me see if I can. I gotta pull one of these up, because you guys gotta see just how good this looks. So I'm gonna pop this right there. Look at that. I mean, come on. These boxes are gorgeous.
Pure beauty.
I love it. I really do. And the other thing you did is that the box flips around. So depending on what you play, put that side of the box up. We appreciate stuff like that.
Yeah. So it was early on, I was trying to think of a way, because I knew the games are siblings, and I wanted to have both games in the same box. And so when I was actually looking at trying to get all the components in there, I realized there's just so much to actually even fit in the box,
right.
Because I was also trying to make sure that a lot of folks might not necessarily have all the space for a gigantic box. And then I also wanted the tile trays in there. So there's all these kind of things that we're trying to factor in. And so double siding turned out to be a good way to get the cost down, but also make sure just all the stuff could even fit in the box. And so when we were looking at double siding everything, we were okay, so everything, you could have charters, map, market, all that stuff. And then we kind of had this moment of like, what about the box? And I thought it'd be really cool to have, it's, why not? You have these two countries, you're going to have these really thematically and different aesthetics. And so, I found an artist, and we were basically saying, let's have 2 full covers, and it costs twice as much to do that. But I thought it'd be just awesome. And actually, right here at the end, right at the end of the campaign, so there are all these groovy posters, these vintage posters that Canadian Pacific put out as part of an ad campaign back in the 1950s, and it's all of them are like safety, comfort, economy, travel Canadian Pacific, see beautiful
Right.
Canada. And so we had a tagline on there for a while, and then it kind of dawned on me probably like last week that, oh, my namesake is Grand Trunk Railroad. That's my namesake. So I should do like at least a tip of the hat to the Grand Trunk there, because I don't, maybe I'm not doing any other games that are in Canada. So that was a really fun thing that we did there. It says travel the Grand Trunk across Canada.
Nice. That's awesome. The artwork's good. Now we do have the board available. You were nice enough to kind of send this along, and now still potentially changes to come, but it's definitely, I love the direction that this is headed. It's still very clean, but I like that there's a little visual interest in here.
Yeah, if I could comment on that a little bit.
Please.
So with the board, so when you're actually looking at map information or tile information, there's two layers to it. You have foreground information and you have background information. So foreground information is track, revenue centers, names, letters on the tiles themselves, reserved hexes. Like basically there's all this kind of information that's usability information. Right. You have background information. That's generally going to be the tile color. So both are points of usability, but in general, when people are trying to mess around with track, a lot of times they're going to mess around with the foreground information, which is where the core point of usability is in the foreground. So like you'll see a lot of times they'll try to have realistic looking track, for example, or they'll mess around with the different way that information is presented. Like, or 1830, how they had the little towns, they had little city, like street grid in the towns themselves. And so as we were messing around with it, and our big priority here was usability, we were messing around with it for a long time, trying to see if there's anything that we could really change to basically mess with the foreground without really impacting usability. And there were some small wins that we got, but one thing that we realized is that like we need to preserve the foreground, and then background is this kind of like one of the main things that we can actually mess with without really hampering usability. So you'll see like some things in the background here. You can see like the stream. Sorry, I'm pointing on my screen so you guys are able to see. So you have the streams running in the background. That's fine. That's fine to mess with, because that's details that aren't getting in the way with you actually using the component. And we also we actually brought out some of the actual cost, the train cost, because you have this river running through the whole map, but then we want to basically pop that up, because just because you have the river in it doesn't necessarily mean you're paying a train cost for it. So then we felt like that was necessary to call out. Also, a very common misconception for 1861 is that you see those little lock symbols around Moscow.
Right, these guys?
Their normal iconography, yeah, exactly. Their original iconography was written as the private companies. So it was like,
just the barbell, right? It was like one of those guys.
Exactly. So, but one of the issues with that is that already means something to people. For folks who play 18xx, that already means something, where it says, oh, yeah, that private company has to be purchased into a company before you can do that. But that's not actually the case. In 61, you just have to be in the 3-phase, and then those hexes can be built on. So that's kind of why we changed that iconography, because I used to get a lot of questions about that, and we figured, we might not keep the locks, but I felt that was clear enough, and then you can kind of instantly look at it and see it's a lock with a 3 on it. Okay, 3-phase. Yeah. But those are some of the things. There was a lot of stuff that went into it, but it was really, really fun digging into the map and trying to figure out what we could play with and what we should leave alone.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things that helps move our print and play copies into production copies, right? I think when we can kind of, I don't want to say it legitimizes it, because that's not what I'm trying to say at all. I'm just trying to say it just kind of gives it more presence and more table presence, and the kind of, we spend a lot of time looking at this map trying to figure out track. Why shouldn't it look a little prettier, right?
It looks great, man.
Yeah, I great job with that one, and
thank you. Thank Kareem.
Yeah, you can definitely see his influence on that. So That's going to be on Kickstarter. This is dropping. There probably is less than a week left. So don't worry. It's funded. It's coming. Do you have any plans to do any late pledges if somebody doesn't listen to this the day of, Josh? Are you going to try and do anything like that?
That's a great question. So I will say that I am not a very smart man. I, I would like to have the bandwidth and the intellectual capacity to orchestrate something like that. But as of right now, my current plan is it's the Kickstarter, and then I'm trying to make sure that this stuff is available at retail.
Right. So I mean, it looks to me like you're pretty much going to be ready to hit the print button as soon as this is all done anyway, right? So the order is going to go pretty quick.
Yeah, for the most part. I mean, obviously, when it goes to Kickstarter, I have this month during the Kickstarter that we're going to be doing some updates to graphic design. So, like, as you can see, I was a bit bummed we actually couldn't get this in the Kickstarter graphics, but they're like all this stuff is double-sided, and there will be very clear iconography of if it's a 61 side or a 67 side, because there's a lot of concern around. Will I be able to tell the difference between the two different sides? And there will be very clear iconography. It just didn't make it into the actual Kickstarter graphics. I think we'll actually might be updating it during the campaign. But yeah,
there might
I think
be
that
a maple leaf on the Canadian stuff. I'm taking a wild guess here.
probably. Well, it'll be a golden double-headed eagle for the Russian side. And if you read the blog that I put up for the cover art and the aesthetic that we were going for, I explained why I chose the double-headed eagle as opposed to the Russian Starr, and it'll be a red maple leaf for the Canada side.
There you go. Awesome. So be sure to check that out. So this gentleman has been a blast. Any parting shots at what might be on the future? Anything else you want to maybe plug or talk about before we head out of here?
Get hyped for the next one.
Always. I'm always hyped.
I'm excited, but I can't talk about it yet.
Of course not.
Awesome.
All right. So, gentlemen, that's it. This is going to do it for this episode of Wheel Tapping. I need to get some plays of 22 in so I can refresh myself. I've only been playing the MRS. So if I want to be able to talk intelligently about the big game, I think I need to get some of those plays in and in time for the next show. So this has been a lot of fun. Josh, if people want to find you on the internet, where is the best place possible for them to do that?
If you Google Grand Trunk Games, you will get my website as the first hit. You will get my Twitter as the second hit. You will get a bunch of blogs about me and my blog and my Facebook and all that stuff. So there's enough stuff out there. I think that you can just look up Grand Trunk Games and you'll figure out where I am. And I think if you are looking up 1861 Russia, 1867 Canada. Yep. So if you look up 1861 Russia, 1867 Canada, Kickstarter is the first hit.
Nice.
So yeah, find it that way.
Awesome. Tony, where can people find you and reach out to you on these crazy interwebs?
Sure. As the screen says, on Twitter at @AFryerGames and Board Game Geek, Tony Fryer is my username.
Right. Awesome. And I'm Chris Whitpan. You can find me at Game All Night Show, and night is spelled NITE. That's my primary account I use for the other show I do called, big surprise, Game All Night. But we also have the @Wheel Tapping on Twitter that I'm starting to use a little bit more. And you can always Gmail us at the wheeltapping@gmail.com, and we will be happy to answer what we can. I think if you have suggestions, things you want to hear about, anything, please, drop us a line and let us know. So that's it. Thank you, gentlemen, for being on today. This was a complete blast. We had some technical problems that we were able to power through and figure out. So you at home will never know what actually went down. So
Tony's voice was just too sexy for the microphone. It couldn't handle it.
It kind of sounded like he was demanding ransom at one point, like put $200 million in the trash can. It was great. It was absolutely great. So there you go, ladies and gentlemen. Have a good night. Thanks for listening to this episode of Wheel Tapping or watching if you're watching at home. We appreciate it. And be sure to tell all your friends. So until next time, have a good day.
Yeah, I realized that by the end of it, I forgot to explain what the differences are, but they're all on the Kickstarter page. The big thing I think is that no, all good.
right.
It's all on the Kickstarter page. Well, so I think the really cool thing here is that with 61, a big thing I find for people to get started, a big blocker for people to get started, at least with 18xx, is I explain the whole game and then. Now, okay, but by the way, here's this private auction, and then there's
and there's this.
Right, and so I think just having a set bundles of the privates and minor companies, you hand them out. And you say, okay, we're going to start in the OR1. Here's a few things that you need to know, and then in the stock rounds, all you're doing for the first few rounds is you're just auctioning minor companies. No big deal. And then as you're so it's this really cool thing to just get people started really fast. Yeah, so that's was Ian's design for 1861 short to create that, and then I have a teaching scenario that is going to have those bundles, but then it's going to run you through 2 sets of operating rounds, like scripted operating rounds.
Okay.
And it's going to pretty much in those operating rounds. My goal was to show off as many different mechanics as possible and explain why they're happening. So it lays all your track for you. It shows how to do compulsory train purchase with a loan, train shuffling, nationalization, mergers, like pretty much the whole gamut, as much as you could show in the first 2 sets of ORs. It is, and it also, I'll say this: you actually end up in pretty even positions at the end of that thing. So it's not just like doing to show it off, but actually you have a viable, a defendable position that you can play going out of the teaching scenario.
Excellent.